Most people move through life the way a passenger moves through a storm, braced, anxious, waiting for the next jolt. They wake up prepared for friction. They plan around disappointment. They speak carefully, as though one wrong word might trigger consequences they cannot control. And then they wonder why life feels like resistance. What if the problem was never the world you live in, but the assumption you carry into it? There is a principle so simple that most overlook it entirely. It operates quietly, without drama, and it governs nearly every outcome you will ever experience. It is this: life does not resist clarity. It reflects it. When you assume opposition, you prepare for it. When you prepare for it, you notice it. When you notice it, you react to it. And in reacting, you confirm it. But when you assume order, when you move as though circumstances must eventually align in your favor, you stop wasting energy on internal arguments. You stop rehearsing failure. You stop interpreting every delay as rejection. This is not about pretending difficulty does not exist. It is about refusing to give difficulty the authority to define your direction. What follows is not a motivational exercise. It is a study of how assumption governs experience, how interpretation shapes outcome, and why the man who decides that life must serve him, regardless of appearances, eventually discovers that it does. This is not theory. It is observable law. And once you understand it, you will never move through the world the same way again. Most men do not realize they are living defensively until they are asked to describe their expectations. When pressed, they admit, often reluctantly, that they expect friction. They expect delays. They expect plans to require adjustment, people to disappoint, and effort to meet resistance. They do not say this with bitterness. They say it as though it were wisdom. But wisdom does not prepare for defeat. Wisdom prepares for clarity. There is a difference between caution and assumption. Caution evaluates risk. Assumption governs interpretation. One is a decision. The other is a posture. The man who lives cautiously may succeed. But the man who lives under the assumption that life must ultimately cooperate with him, this man moves differently. He does not hesitate as long. He does not second-guess as often. He does not abandon plans simply because the first attempt produced resistance. This assumption is not passive. It is active. It instructs the mind before events occur. It tells the mind what to expect, and expectation precedes perception. You have experienced this yourself, though you may not have named it. There have been days when you woke already convinced that everything would go wrong. And on those days, small inconveniences felt like confirmation. Minor delays felt personal. Every obstacle seemed to validate your suspicion that the day was against you. Then there have been days when you woke with a quiet sense of alignment. On those days, the same inconveniences felt manageable. The same delays felt like adjustments, not attacks. The same obstacles felt like problems to solve, not verdicts to endure. The circumstances did not change. Your assumption did. Assumption is the silent instruction you give to your mind. It tells your mind what to notice, what to magnify, what to dismiss, and what to fear. It governs your reactions before you are even aware you are reacting. When you assume that life is working against you, your mind becomes a detector of threats. It scans for evidence of resistance. It magnifies small problems into large ones. It interprets ambiguity as hostility. Over time, this habit of interpretation becomes automatic. You no longer choose it. It chooses you. But when you assume that life must eventually work in your favor, not because you deserve it, but because you have decided it, your mind begins to function differently. It scans for advantage. It notices opportunity where others see only inconvenience. It interprets ambiguity as potential rather than threat. This is not optimism. Optimism is emotional. It rises and falls with mood. Assumption is structural. It does not depend on feeling. It depends on decision. The disciplined mind decides first, then observes. The undisciplined mind observes first, then decides. The difference is not subtle. It determines who controls meaning and who is controlled by it. Most men surrender this control without realizing it. They allow events to tell them what to think. A delay occurs, and they immediately conclude something has gone wrong. A plan fails, and they interpret it as rejection. A person disappoints them, and they assume betrayal. These conclusions feel natural because they arrive quickly. But speed does not equal accuracy. The mind that reacts first often interprets poorly. The man who assumes favorable outcomes does not react immediately. He pauses. He withholds judgment. He allows the event to unfold further before naming it. In that pause, he preserves his authority. Authority over interpretation is the foundation of all personal power. If you cannot govern what an event means to you, you cannot govern what you do in response to it. And if you cannot govern your response, you cannot govern your results. This is why two men can face identical circumstances and produce entirely different outcomes. The circumstances did not favor one over the other. The interpretation did. One man saw a setback and withdrew. The other saw an adjustment and persisted. One man lost confidence. The other gained clarity. The event was neutral. The meaning was chosen. Meaning is always chosen, even when it feels automatic. The question is whether you choose it consciously or allow habit to choose it for you. Most men allow habit to choose. They have trained their minds to expect difficulty, and so difficulty is what they find. Not because life is difficult, but because expectation governs perception. This training began early. You were taught to be realistic. You were taught to prepare for the worst. You were taught that hoping for the best was naive, and that expecting success without proof was arrogant. These lessons were well-intentioned, but they trained your mind to cooperate with fear. And fear is not a reliable architect. It builds small, defensive lives with remarkable efficiency. The man who acts as if everything works in his favor rejects this training. He does not argue with it. He simply replaces it. He decides, once, clearly, without negotiation, that life must serve him. Not because he is special, but because he refuses to believe otherwise. That refusal becomes the governing assumption of his life. From that assumption, everything else follows. His tone changes. His posture changes. His persistence changes. He stops bracing for disappointment and starts expecting alignment. He stops interpreting resistance as rejection and starts interpreting it as refinement. Life does not argue with this assumption. It reflects it. When the mind expects cooperation, it notices cooperation. When it expects usefulness, it finds usefulness. When it expects that every event, no matter how inconvenient, must contain instruction or advantage, it begins to extract that advantage automatically. This is not wishful thinking. Wishful thinking hopes for change without committing to action. Assumption commits to action because it has already decided the outcome must eventually align. The difference is profound. One waits for proof. The other creates it. You have been waiting for proof. You have been waiting for circumstances to confirm that it is safe to commit fully, safe to expect success, safe to assume favorable outcomes. But law does not respond to waiting. It responds to decision. Decide now, not later, not when conditions improve, not when fear subsides, that life must work in your favor. Decide it as fact, not hope. Decide it as instruction, not aspiration. Then watch how quickly your interpretation changes. Watch how quickly your actions follow. Watch how quickly life begins to cooperate with a mind that no longer resists it internally. Assumption is the architecture of experience. Build it correctly, and everything else becomes easier. Build it poorly, and you will spend years repairing what should never have been broken. Events arrive without verdict. They carry no inherent meaning. Meaning is applied afterward, swiftly and silently, by the mind. In that moment of interpretation, before action, before speech, often before conscious thought, the trajectory of experience begins to form. Two men encounter the same obstacle. One emerges strengthened. The other withdraws, discouraged. The obstacle itself did not discriminate. It offered the same resistance to both. The difference lay entirely in what each man concluded the obstacle meant. Most men do not realize how quickly they assign meaning. The process happens so fast it feels like perception rather than decision. But it is not perception. It is interpretation disguised as observation. Perception records what happened. Interpretation decides what it means. And what it means determines what happens next. The undisciplined mind interprets impulsively. It labels events based on emotion, habit, or fear. A delay becomes a rejection. A failure becomes a verdict. A correction becomes an insult. Once labeled, the mind closes. The event is filed away as evidence of something larger. Evidence that effort does not pay, that plans do not work, that life is unpredictable and hostile. Over time, these labels accumulate. They form a narrative. The narrative becomes identity. And identity governs behavior. The disciplined mind does not allow this process to occur automatically. It intervenes. It pauses between event and conclusion. It withholds judgment until the event has been examined, not merely felt. This pause is where power is preserved. In that pause, the man asks a different question. Not, why did this happen to me? But how will this serve me? That single shift in questioning changes everything. The first question assumes victimhood. It treats the event as something done to you. The second question assumes agency. It treats the event as material to be used. Material can always be used. Verdicts cannot. The man who governs interpretation does not ask whether an event was fair. He asks what it revealed. He does not ask whether it hurt. He asks what it taught. He does not ask whether it delayed him. He asks what it prepared him for. These questions are not meant to suppress emotion. They are meant to redirect it. Emotion is powerful, but it is not reliable. It reacts to surfaces. It magnifies discomfort. It distorts proportion. Left ungoverned, emotion transforms minor setbacks into major crises. The disciplined mind uses emotion as signal, not instruction. It feels frustration, but does not obey it. It feels disappointment, but does not conclude from it. It allows emotion to pass through without allowing it to govern meaning. This requires practice. The mind has been trained for years to react emotionally first and reason later. Reversing that order takes repetition. But repetition is the only path to mastery. One correct interpretation does little if followed by habitual doubt. The mind must be trained to return again and again to the same governing question. How will this serve me? Over time, this question becomes automatic. The mind stops asking whether something is good or bad. It starts asking how it can be used. This shift transforms every experience into raw material. Raw material has no emotional charge. It simply exists, waiting to be shaped. The man who treats experience as raw material does not waste energy resenting it. He extracts value from it and moves forward. This posture is visible to others. They see a man who does not collapse under pressure. They see someone who adjusts without complaining, who continues without dramatizing difficulty. They mistake this for confidence. It is not confidence. It is control of meaning. Confidence comes and goes. Control of meaning is permanent. Once a man learns to govern interpretation, he cannot be shaken by external events. He may be inconvenienced, delayed, or corrected, but he cannot be discouraged. Discouragement requires accepting the interpretation that something has gone wrong. The disciplined mind refuses that interpretation. It does not deny difficulty. It denies difficulty's authority to define direction. There is a profound difference between the two. Denial avoids reality. Refusal governs it. The man who acts as if everything works in his favor refuses to grant events the power to determine his outcome. He understands that events are temporary, but interpretation is lasting. A single misinterpreted event can derail years of effort. A single correctly interpreted event can accelerate progress dramatically. Consider how many lives have been altered by interpretation. A rejection that was labeled as failure became the reason a man quit. A delay that was labeled as misfortune became the excuse to abandon a plan. A correction that was labeled as insult became the justification for resentment. None of these interpretations were required. They were chosen, often unconsciously, by minds trained to expect opposition. Had those same events been interpreted differently, as redirection, as preparation, as refinement, the outcomes would have been entirely different. The men would have continued. They would have adjusted. They would have finished. Interpretation determines whether a man persists or retreats. And persistence determines nearly everything else. Most men do not fail because they lack ability. They fail because they misinterpret resistance. They assume resistance means rejection. They assume difficulty means error. They assume delay means denial. None of these assumptions are accurate. Resistance often signals that something worthwhile is being attempted. Difficulty often signals that skill is being developed. Delay often signals that timing is being refined. But the mind that interprets impulsively does not see this. It sees only discomfort and withdraws. The disciplined mind sees differently. It sees resistance as confirmation. It sees difficulty as instruction. It sees delay as preparation. These interpretations do not eliminate discomfort, but they preserve direction. Direction preserved is progress continued. Progress continued is outcome achieved. This is why interpretation is more valuable than talent, more powerful than opportunity, and more decisive than circumstance. Talent without correct interpretation leads to wasted potential. Opportunity without correct interpretation leads to missed advantage. Circumstance without correct interpretation leads to victimhood. Interpretation governs all of it. An interpretation is a choice. It is not imposed by events. It is selected by the mind. The question is whether the selection is conscious or habitual. Habitual interpretation follows fear. Conscious interpretation follows decision. The man who decides that everything must work in his favor does not wait to see whether an event agrees with him. He decides first, then interprets accordingly. This decision precedes observation. It governs perception. It shapes meaning. Meaning, once shaped, determines action. Action determines result. Result confirms interpretation. The cycle reinforces itself. This is why the man who expects favorable outcomes experiences them more frequently than the man who does not. Not because life favors him, but because his interpretation preserves his effort long enough for outcomes to form. Most men quit before outcomes have time to develop. They misinterpret early resistance and withdraw. They leave behind partially formed advantage that someone else later inherits. The disciplined man does not make this error. He interprets resistance as part of the process, not evidence against it. He remains. And in remaining, he allows outcome to mature. Maturity takes time. It cannot be rushed. But it also cannot occur if effort is interrupted. Interpretation determines whether effort continues or ceases. And continuation determines whether advantage is realized or abandoned. This is the discipline of interpretation. It is not dramatic. It is not emotional. It is simply the refusal to label experience prematurely, the refusal to grant events authority over meaning, and the refusal to quit because discomfort arrived. These refusals, practiced daily, become habit. Habit becomes character. Character becomes fate. Say this quietly, without emotion, as instruction rather than encouragement. No event decides my outcome. The meaning I assign determines what follows. I govern interpretation. Interpretation governs result. Hold to this, and you will discover that life becomes less chaotic, less threatening, and far more responsive than you ever imagined possible. There is no wasted effort for the man who understands how value accumulates. Most men judge their labor by immediate return. If effort produces visible result quickly, they call it successful. If effort produces no immediate result, they call it wasted. This judgment is premature. It misunderstands how preparation works. Nature does not reveal her processes on demand. She withholds visible return until internal structure is complete. Roots grow in darkness. Strength forms in concealment. Capacity builds silently, often for years, before it expresses itself outwardly. Human effort follows the same law. Every attempt, every failure, every adjustment, every hour spent in labor that produced no applause, contributes to an invisible reserve. This reserve is not sentimental. It is not metaphorical. It is real. It gathers skill, judgment, restraint, and precision. When sufficient, it releases outcome with sudden force. Men who abandon effort prematurely do not lose the time they spent. They lose the value that was accumulating. That value does not disappear. It remains, waiting. Often, another man enters the same field, continues the work, and achieves success swiftly. The success was not his alone. It was made possible by accumulation begun by the first man and abandoned. This is not injustice. It is law. Life rewards completion, not intention. Effort interrupted forfeits its reserve. Effort continued redeems everything that came before it. The man who acts as if everything works in his favor understands this principle deeply. He refuses to discard effort simply because it has not yet produced visible result. He knows that visibility is the final stage, not the first. He knows that appearance follows preparation, not the reverse. This understanding changes how he responds to delay. Delay does not discourage him because he does not interpret it as rejection. He interprets it as accumulation still forming. He does not ask, "Why hasn't this worked yet?" He asks, "What is this building that I cannot yet see?" This question preserves his effort. It keeps his mind open to advantage that has not yet revealed itself. Hidden advantage wears many disguises. A delay may force reconsideration that prevents future error. A failure may expose weakness that needed correction. A detour may introduce an association that later proves essential. These advantages are real, but they reveal themselves only to the mind that remains open. Impatience closes the mind. It demands explanation before explanation is possible. It labels experience prematurely and walks away carrying only bitterness, leaving behind instruction that could have been transformative. The disciplined mind does not make this error. It delays judgment. It allows events to unfold further before naming them. It refuses to call something final while it is still forming. This patience is not passive. It is active restraint. The man does not sit idle waiting for clarity. He continues working while clarity forms. He trusts that work done in good faith accumulates value whether or not that value is immediately visible. This trust is not blind. It is based on observation. Every man who examines his own life honestly will find examples of efforts that seemed wasted at the time, but later proved essential. The job that felt like a detour taught a skill that became central later. The relationship that ended painfully introduced a perspective that matured him. The plan that failed forced a reconsideration that led to something better. These were not accidents. They were evidence of hidden advantage operating beyond immediate perception. The tragedy is that most men only recognize this pattern in retrospect. They spend years resenting delays, cursing failures, and abandoning plans, only to realize decades later that much of what they resisted was preparing them. Had they understood this law earlier, they would have saved enormous energy. They would not have wasted years fighting experience. They would have extracted value from it and moved forward. The man who learns this early gains an advantage that compounds. He stops resisting life and starts using it. He stops demanding that effort justify itself immediately and starts allowing it to mature. He stops quitting when results pause and starts remaining when accumulation is forming. This shift saves years, perhaps decades. Instead of abandoning one partially completed effort after another, the man completes one fully. One completion teaches more than a dozen attempts. One sustained effort produces more than many interrupted ones. Completion also builds something that cannot be taught: self-trust. The man who finishes what he starts, especially when results were delayed, proves to himself that he does not retreat under uncertainty. This proof becomes permanent. It cannot be shaken by opinion or circumstance. With this proof, the man approaches future efforts differently. He does not panic when progress slows. He does not abandon plans when resistance appears. He recognizes the familiar shape of delay and remains steady. Others notice this steadiness. They see a man who does not collapse, who does not dramatize difficulty, who does not require constant reassurance. Such men are rare. Life responds to them differently. Opportunities appear more readily. Cooperation replaces resistance. Timing improves. These changes are often attributed to luck or personality. In truth, they are responses to reliability. Life trusts the man who finishes what he begins. Hidden advantage also explains why success often appears sudden. Accumulation is invisible until it reaches capacity. When capacity is reached, release is swift. Circumstances align rapidly. Obstacles dissolve. Opportunities converge. To the observer, the change seems abrupt. To the man who endured the preparation, it feels overdue. This suddenness confuses those who did not witness the labor. They speak of timing, chance, or fortune. They do not see the years of unseen effort that made the moment possible. The disciplined man does not argue with their conclusions. He knows that explanation would be wasted. Only endurance teaches this law. Men who quit too early often believe they are protecting themselves from further loss. In reality, they ensure loss by discarding accumulated value. They must begin again elsewhere, carrying none of what they left behind. Beginning again is costly. It consumes enthusiasm. It repeats lessons already learned. It delays completion. Over time, this pattern becomes exhausting. Men lose not years, but decades this way. Not through catastrophe, but through repeated abandonment of partially formed advantage. The man who remains through concealment avoids this waste. One sustained effort replaces many false starts. One finished plan produces more than a dozen abandoned ones. Hidden advantage also protects against despair. When the man knows nothing is wasted, discouragement loses its power. Difficulty remains, but it no longer threatens meaning. Meaning preserved is effort preserved. Effort preserved becomes outcome. Say this quietly, without excitement, as fact rather than hope. Nothing I apply in good faith is ever wasted. What does not appear, yet is preparing itself. I do not judge effort by immediate return. I judge it by continuation. This understanding steadies interpretation. It prevents premature judgment. It preserves value where others discard it. And when you accept that effort accumulates invisibly, you stop fearing delay. You stop resenting detour. You stop labeling difficulty as failure. Life responds to this acceptance with cooperation. Not immediately, not dramatically, but reliably. There is a moment in every serious undertaking when accumulated effort presses hardest against the mind. It is not marked by catastrophe. It does not arrive with drama. It comes quietly, disguised as reason. At this moment, quitting does not feel like surrender. It feels like clarity. This is where intelligent men fail. Not at the beginning, when enthusiasm is fresh. Not at the end, when results are visible. They fail at the threshold, when effort has matured but outcome has not yet declared itself. This threshold is the turning point. It is not an event. It is a test. Life asks one question here. Will this man continue without reassurance? The answer determines whether accumulated effort will be released or forfeited. Most men answer incorrectly. They demand proof before proceeding further. They say they will continue once conditions improve, once signs appear, once resistance lessens. But because they demand proof first, conditions do not improve. Resistance remains. The reserve stays locked. This is not cruelty. It is order. Law does not respond to negotiation. It responds to decision. At the turning point, the mind begins to review the past with unusual clarity. It calculates time invested, energy spent, and results not yet received. It does not exaggerate these facts. It presents them accurately, but incompletely. What it omits is the invisible accumulation that has been forming beneath the surface. This omission is critical. The mind argues from what can be seen, not from what is forming. It mistakes absence of evidence for evidence of absence. When this reasoning is accepted, the decision to quit appears sensible. Quitting at this stage provides immediate relief. Pressure lifts. Responsibility dissolves. The man feels lighter, calmer, even justified. This relief is deceptive. It is temporary. It is the calm of surrender, not resolution. Weeks later, dissatisfaction returns. The man senses that something was left unfinished. He may not articulate it, but it weighs on him. This weight is heavier than the pressure he escaped. Those who quit here often say they will return later. They believe timing was wrong. Rarely do they return with equal strength. Habit has learned retreat. The next threshold arrives sooner and feels heavier. Each retreat trains the mind to abandon effort when strain appears. Over time, this training becomes identity. The man comes to believe that endurance is beyond him, when in truth, he never allowed endurance to complete its work. By contrast, the man who remains at the turning point does not feel triumphant. He does not feel confident. He often feels tired, uncertain, and isolated. What distinguishes him is not emotion. It is refusal. He refuses to withdraw effort simply because comfort invites him. He refuses to declare failure while work remains unfinished. This refusal stabilizes his thinking. When decision settles, inner argument ends. Energy previously wasted on debate becomes available for action. Persistence shifts from struggle to posture. This shift is subtle but decisive. The man no longer asks whether he should continue. He has decided. Action becomes cleaner. Focus sharpens. Small adjustments replace large doubts. Often, this inner settlement precedes external change by only a short distance. The world responds once the mind stops wavering. The timing varies, but the sequence does not. I have observed men endure years of uncertainty only to experience movement shortly after this inner decision was made. To observers, it appeared sudden. To the man, it felt earned. Those who pass the turning point gain something more valuable than immediate success. They gain self-trust. They know now that they do not retreat under pressure. This knowledge changes how they approach all future effort. Fear of difficulty weakens. Delay loses its threat. The man no longer panics when results pause. He recognizes the familiar shape of resistance and remains steady. Others notice this steadiness. They see a man who does not rush to explain himself, who does not seek permission to continue, who does not dramatize uncertainty. Such men are often described as grounded or unyielding. This perception invites respect. Respect invites cooperation. Cooperation accelerates progress. None of this is demanded. It emerges naturally from persistence. The turning point is also where many men lose years of life. Each abandonment forces repetition. Lessons must be relearned. Confidence must be rebuilt. Time is consumed returning to the same place under new circumstances. One refusal to quit can replace many years of beginning again. One completed effort teaches more than a dozen abandoned ones. The disciplined man understands this cost. He knows that quitting does not end struggle. It postpones it. The same test will return until it is passed. This knowledge steadies him when the turning point arrives. He does not dramatize it. He does not seek counsel from those who have never endured. He remains. Remaining does not require enthusiasm. It requires decision. Decision quiets doubt. Doubt drains energy. Energy conserved sustains effort. At this stage, statements become declarations rather than encouragements. The man does not attempt to persuade himself. He states what he has decided. I do not withdraw when effort feels unrewarded. I remain because this moment decides everything that follows. These words do not excite. They anchor. Once the turning point is passed, effort often becomes easier. Not because the work has changed, but because inner resistance has lost its purpose. Law no longer needs to test what has proven itself. This does not mean difficulty disappears. It means difficulty no longer threatens direction. The man works without inner opposition. That is the true reward of persistence. Not success alone, but freedom from self-sabotage. Men who quit at the turning point rarely recognize how close they were. They tell themselves it would not have worked anyway. This belief protects pride, but steals truth. The man who remains never needs such protection. His experience has answered the question permanently. This moment, quiet, uncelebrated, easily misunderstood, is where lives separate. Some turn back, convinced they were wise. Others continue without assurance and inherit what was forming all along. Men speak of time as though it were stolen from them, by circumstance, by misfortune, by delay. Few ever consider that the greatest thief of time is not opposition. It is quitting, not dramatic failure, not lack of opportunity. Quitting. Each time a man withdraws from a worthy effort before completion, he condemns himself to repeat the same lesson elsewhere, under a different name, at a later age. Persistence is misunderstood because its cost is felt immediately while its reward is delayed. Quitting feels efficient. It promises relief. It creates the illusion of movement, of choosing something new, something better. Yet in truth, quitting lengthens every road. It forces the man to circle back to the same point again and again, always wiser in theory, but poorer in results. I have watched men change occupations, plans, locations, and ambitions repeatedly, convinced each change would save time. Years later, they were still beginning. Their lives were full of preparation and empty of completion. What they lacked was not intelligence. It was endurance. By contrast, the man who persists through one true turning point acquires an asset that never depreciates. He learns, not from books, but from experience, that effort carried faithfully cannot betray him. This knowledge becomes permanent. It alters how he approaches all future undertakings. Once a man has endured discouragement without retreat, fear loses its authority over him. He no longer imagines difficulty as a verdict. He sees it as a signal. He does not rush to escape strain because he knows strain precedes release. This knowledge changes his sense of time. He no longer measures days by comfort or reward. He measures them by fidelity to purpose. Ironically, this shift shortens every undertaking that follows. Men who quit often believe they are conserving strength. In reality, they dissipate it. Each retreat weakens confidence. Each unfinished effort leaves behind doubt. Over time, doubt becomes habit. Habit becomes identity. The man begins to see himself as one who almost succeeds. Persistence reverses this pattern. Each refusal to quit strengthens self-trust. The man proves to himself that he will remain when pressure rises. That proof cannot be shaken by opinion or circumstance. It becomes inner certainty. This certainty alters behavior subtly. The man no longer hesitates as long before acting. He no longer seeks reassurance at every turn. He no longer prepares excuses in advance. His actions become direct, economical, decisive. Others notice this change. They trust him more readily. They rely on his judgment. They sense that he will not abandon responsibility when conditions grow difficult. This trust is not requested. It is recognized. Life recognizes it as well. Opportunities appear with less friction. Cooperation replaces resistance. Timing improves. These effects are often attributed to confidence or leadership. In truth, they are responses to reliability. The reliable man finishes what he begins. He does not require constant encouragement. He does not panic when results pause. He continues. Life learns this and responds accordingly. This is why persistence is the greatest time saver a man can possess. It eliminates repetition. It prevents the need to relearn the same lessons under harsher conditions. It compresses years of wandering into a single line of advancement. Men who quit often believe they can return later. Later is rarely kinder. Energy diminishes. Responsibilities increase. Courage weakens with neglect. What was once possible with effort becomes difficult with regret. The man who persists early spares himself this burden. He completes before life becomes crowded with obligation. He finishes before doubt hardens into belief. This alone can save 10 years of life. Instead of abandoning one worthy aim after another, the man completes one fully. Completion teaches more than endless preparation ever could. Completion also reshapes identity. The man no longer wonders whether he can finish. He knows. This knowledge becomes the foundation of future confidence. With this foundation, the man chooses more carefully. He does not commit lightly, knowing commitment carries cost. But once committed, he does not waver. This selectivity prevents wasted effort and scattered energy. Scattered energy exhausts without result. Focused energy compounds. Persistence concentrates effort until it breaks through resistance. Men often admire persistence from a distance, calling it strength or willpower. They do not see that it is largely a matter of decision repeated daily. The man does not persist heroically. He persists quietly. Quiet persistence is rarely praised. It does not announce itself, yet it produces the most enduring results. The persistent man also becomes economical with emotion. He does not waste feeling on resentment or complaint. He conserves it for execution. This conservation steadies him when others fluctuate wildly. Over time, steadiness becomes habit. Habit becomes character. Character determines destiny. Life stops testing what has proven itself. Resistance diminishes once its purpose is fulfilled. The man has demonstrated that he will not retreat. Law no longer needs to ask the question. This does not mean challenges disappear. It means challenges no longer threaten direction. The man meets them as tasks rather than warnings. The greatest reward of persistence is not success alone. It is freedom from fear of effort. The man is no longer enslaved by comfort. He can undertake long work without dread. This freedom separates those who lead from those who follow. Leaders are willing to endure without applause. Followers require reassurance. Life rewards the former with authority. Authority arises naturally from consistency. The man who remains when others withdraw gains influence without demanding it. Others sense his steadiness and align with it. This alignment accelerates achievement. What once required struggle now moves with cooperation. The road does not shorten because it is easier. It shortens because the man no longer leaves it. Consider how many times you have started over in life. Not because the aim was wrong, but because effort became unrewarding. Each restart costs time that cannot be recovered. Persistence prevents this loss. One completed effort replaces many abandoned ones. One victory earned through endurance outweighs countless rehearsals of quitting. This is why persistence is not slow. It is the fastest route possible. Quitting feels quick, but it condemns the man to return later under heavier conditions. If you learn nothing else, learn this. Every time you do not quit, when quitting feels logical, you reclaim years of your life. That reclaimed time appears as confidence, as momentum, as calm authority. Others call it luck. You know it as law. There comes a point, often unnoticed, when a man stops asking whether his assumption is correct and begins living as though it already is. This shift is not dramatic. It does not announce itself, but it changes everything. The man no longer wakes wondering whether life will cooperate. He assumes it must. He no longer interprets resistance as evidence against him. He interprets it as adjustment. He no longer debates internally whether to continue. He has decided. This settled quality is rare. Most men live in a state of constant negotiation with themselves. They decide to persist, then reconsider. They commit to a direction, then question it. They choose an interpretation, then doubt it. This internal negotiation exhausts them. It drains energy that could be used for action. It creates hesitation where clarity is needed. It produces inconsistency where reliability would serve better. The settled mind does not negotiate. It has decided once, clearly, and does not revisit the decision unless new evidence demands it. This is not rigidity. It is economy. Economy of thought produces economy of action. The man who does not waste energy debating himself has more energy available for execution. Execution produces results. Results confirm the decision. The cycle strengthens itself. Others feel this settledness. They sense that the man is not performing confidence. He is not repeating affirmations to convince himself. He has simply decided, and the decision governs him. This quality invites trust. People align with those who are not conflicted internally. They sense stability and respond to it. Opportunities appear more readily. Cooperation follows naturally. Resistance softens without being fought. None of this is manipulated. It emerges as a byproduct of inner clarity. The settled mind also becomes immune to distraction. It does not chase every new possibility. It does not abandon direction at the first sign of difficulty. It does not confuse motion with progress. It remains fixed on what it has decided and adjusts only the method, not the aim. This focus compounds over time. While others scatter effort across many partial pursuits, the settled man concentrates his entirely on one. Concentration produces depth. Depth produces mastery. Mastery produces authority. Authority is not claimed. It is granted by life, by others, by circumstance, to those who have proven they will not waver. The man who acts as if everything works in his favor eventually stops needing to act. The posture becomes natural. The assumption becomes instinct. The interpretation becomes automatic. At this stage, effort feels lighter. Not because the work has changed, but because inner resistance has dissolved. The man no longer fights himself. He works with himself. This unity accelerates everything. What once required hours of internal debate now occurs in moments. What once required reassurance now proceeds on decision alone. What once required proof now operates on assumption. This is not recklessness. It is clarity hardened by repetition. The settled mind also stops comparing itself to others. It measures progress by its own standard, continuation. As long as the man is continuing, he is succeeding. Results are secondary. Continuation is primary. This perspective protects against discouragement. The man does not collapse when progress slows because he does not measure success by speed. He measures it by persistence. And persistence, once settled, becomes effortless. It is no longer a struggle. It is simply how the man operates. Say this quietly, as fact rather than aspiration. I have decided that life must work in my favor. I do not revisit this decision. I interpret all experience through it. I act accordingly. This is settled. When these words become true, not hoped for, but lived, you will discover that life ceases to feel like resistance. It begins to feel like cooperation. Not because life has changed, but because you have stopped resisting it internally. And when internal resistance ends, external resistance follows. This is not mystical. It is observable. It is law. And it begins the moment you decide, without retreat, without negotiation, without doubt, that everything must work in your favor. Not someday. Now.